particularly, well, I really have something to live up to now, don't I? Okay, great. Okay, so this is a rather large topic and hard to cover in sort of 20 minutes. First, a quick question to the group. How many people here are currently involved in creating a medtech business? Good. How many people are seriously contemplating or interested in creating a medtech business? Okay, and how many know nothing about medtech or are here to really learn what medtech is? Okay, so for those people, those last people, this is going to be sort of drinking a bit from a fire hose. So I'll try and be gentle, but there's a lot of information. And the other thing I want to do is my main goal is to get you enthusiastic about the sector and to really seriously consider your options. I want to be realistic, as my colleagues also want to be realistic. It's a tough game. I don't want to depress you with how tough it is, but I also want to be realistic, and I want you to know how tough it is in many ways. It's not like, you know, Joel Cola and Twinkies and developing a mobile app over the weekend and, you know, making $1 billion. Actually, developing mobile apps isn't even that. So what I want to do is I want to talk about what is medtech, contrasting it a bit with pharma, and I'm going to go quickly over that. The medtech ecosystem. It's not just about you building your technology and then by yourself going out and somehow making money. There's a rather large ecosystem associated with it. Talk about some industry trends, both locally and globally, and talking about the innovation, financing, and adoption of technologies and trends in financing. Now, as Lalit was saying, one of the important things is financing of companies, of course, and we've got a not unique, but an important aspect in Canada, the SR&D tax credits, which Bob will talk about. But then in our examples, I wanted to give, and I invited several speakers to give 3 different perspectives. One, a venture-backed perspective, one, what I might call almost serendipity, and then angel-backed, which is John Connolly, and then one on bootstrapping. So it's not about venture, it's not about angel, it's about moving from distribution through towards R&D and original product development. We like to call the Bayless model, and then summarize. So what is medtech? I like to say medtech is anything other than drugs or biologics. And that's a very broad definition. It includes medical devices, diagnostics and imaging, assistive and home healthcare, and health IT and mobile health. And if you look at these technologies, which incidentally are all Canadian, many of which are from Ontario, and some of which of the owners are in the room, you'll see that it's a very sophisticated selection of technologies. This isn't something that you, just out of your own head, can go home and create out of thin air, as sometimes products are out of IT or other retail products and so on. So these are quite sophisticated. I'm not going to go through them all, but they range from very sophisticated surgical technologies or diagnostic technologies, moving to health IT at the bottom there, research-related products, and so on. And I can tell you from personal experience that the technologies developed in the USA, in Europe, I was just in Israel last week, seeing 20 companies. I can tell you that the sophistication of the technologies coming out of universities and being developed in Canada are as sophisticated as any technologies in the world. The differences between our success in commercialization does not have to do with the IP. It has to do with the people, the receptiveness of the environment, and here, and so on. Now, when people think of life sciences or medical technologies, often they think of drugs or biologics. And I want to tell you there's some distinct differences between medtech and drugs and biologics. And some of them have to do with culture and perspectives, but they actually relate very much to the science and engineering of them, and it reflects in the amount of time and cost to take something to market. I don't want to dwell on this too much, but I want to say there is a big difference. Okay? So you can see there, devices, engineering materials, local engineering and materials, local effects, technology development, and so on the devices side, assembly of technologies to solve a particular problem with a very specific design, versus in drugs, which is very much chemistry and chemistry and discovery and biology, systemic effects, research, very slow trial and error, and scientists as opposed to engineers. So they're very different processes. And if you look at the result of this, the historic pharma and biotech innovation pathway Takes anywhere from 10 to 12 to 15 years to get to market and about $1 billion to reach market. And those of you who know the field will know that it's also really stagnating right now and looking for some improvements. If you look at the med tech environment, it's much quicker. I'm being a bit optimistic with the two, but 2 to 7 years to market, $30 to $70 million to cash flow positive as opposed to $1 billion to cash flow positive. But the biggest difference is on the left-hand side there. Yeah. On the left-hand side there, where you go from the idea and then turning into something useful, turning into a product, the regulatory review process, market introduction and diffusion. But look at all these pathways back and forth. It's very much an integrated, interactive development process between the healthcare providers and the technology innovators, whereas drugs is very much a process of scientific discovery. You don't have to iterate with the healthcare system other than to do clinical trials. So this process is much more controllable than drugs, can be much shorter than drugs, and also the life cycle of this, with all these iteration loops, the life cycle is about 12 to 18 months for a product, as opposed to 20 years. So products go through a lot of revision. On the other side, on the company side, there's very much a life cycle going from original ideas. 93% of Medtronic's products on the market today were conceived by practicing physicians, not by Medtronic scientists, which is a very interesting statistic. Rather than thinking it's coming from the company, it's actually coming from the providers. Then VC financing startup companies, getting through regulatory review, then consumption of those companies by large med tech and going for global payers. This is a typical, it's not the same for all, but typical. So that life cycle, that ecosystem of companies is also very important to consider when you're looking at your exit. So one of the sort of things that people don't know very much about is that medtech is one of the highest return businesses there is, period. So if you look at this data from Boston Consulting Group over a 10-year period ending in 2006, and you look at the total shareholder return for public companies, medtech is at the top. And this, taking that one line, medtech, financial services, steel, pharmaceuticals, and so on. They have done very well. If you extend that data from 2000 all the way to 2010, you can see that comparing medtech with pharma, still very, very positive. Much superior to pharma in the S&P 500. People don't know that very much. Now this is public companies. There are the reasons there as to why, the shorter time frames and so on. But if you look at the venture-backed companies as well, if you compare life sciences companies, now this is biotech, pharma, and medtech, versus IT, it's a startling difference. It's a startling difference. And I'll bet most of us think of IT as being the place where people make most money. Well, there are the Facebooks and the Googles, but there are an awful lot of losers. There aren't as many Facebooks and Googles in the medtech sector, but there are a lot more winners than there are losers in the IT sector. So the returns take longer to get, but they can be very significant. The other thing about medtech is where these life science companies got their returns over 10 to 15 years, the medtech companies are getting their returns in a much shorter space of time. But a lot of people don't know these aspects of the life science industry. But let's talk about, now it's it's something you need to know, but let's talk about something in the regulated, bringing a regulated product to market. Several stages. The proof of concept. Does it actually work in the lab? Does the thing you're trying to develop, does it actually work in principle? Then, clinical proof of concept. Can you take that thing that works on the bench and does it actually work on human tissue? Does it actually work in patients? Then the business model. Is someone actually going to be willing, can they actually pay you for it? Because many times there's regulated markets, social healthcare systems and so on. So can they actually pay it? Do you have a business model that's actually going to work? Even if it's the greatest technology, sometimes the business model will fail. And your great technology cannot be bought by anybody. I know that sounds weird, but it's true. Then regulatory compliance. Is the device safe and effective? That has to be done per country. Then the reimbursement system. Does someone actually have a method of paying for this? That's per payer or per healthcare system. Formulary compliance. Are they actually going to buy yours as opposed to someone else's in the same kind of region? And then adoption. Are providers actually going to use it? And competition does it on an ongoing basis outperform. So you can see, I didn't want to depress you guys, but I want to be realistic that these are the kinds of things that medical device or med tech companies have to address, and they need to think about them strategically right from the beginning of the technology. So on that point, if you look at a typical life cycle of a generic company, you need some of the things that happen, mistakes that happen is when you don't think about reimbursement right up front. If you wait until much later until your technology is done before you think about reimbursement, you are at great risk of failure. So people start thinking about reimbursement right up front and working on the reimbursement and business model from the very early stages of the concept. So once I know I'm going to treat breast cancer in this particular way, okay, how's someone going to buy it? Who's going to buy it? Who am I going to displace? All those strategic issues. Then the regulatory side is done largely in parallel with that, and then the formulary and distribution discussions, how you're going to develop a set of evidence to allow you to get into the market in that location, and then of course you've got your ongoing competitive sales and support. So you can see it's a lot different than just an IT product which you create, you build, and you go and sell it. It's a lot different environment. The other pressures that are coming on the medtech environment is in the old days, if you just came up with a new technology, you came up with a new technology and you sold the first one, and then the next one came out, and the next one came out, the healthcare system tended to have ever rising costs because these technologies would be layered on top of each other. Well, the world is changing somewhat and saying, now when we introduce a new technology, we're going to delist the technologies that don't work as well as the new one. And so you're going to have technologies replacing each other. Now we're just in the early stages of this method coming in, but it is coming in. And it's really a great challenge and something that companies have to take advantage of, or understand rather. And as you're designing or conceiving of a technology, you need to consider two things. One is, how does it compare with the others on a clinical benefit and cost efficacy basis, and then later in the adoption incentive. So here, if you're thinking about your own technology, you've got to think about technologies that have a much better clinical benefit than other people's technologies. And in fact, on a cost effectiveness basis, whether cost per quality adjusted life year or other surrogate measures, is it significantly better than those? And ideally, you're looking at something that is clinically much better and much more cost effective. Normally, technologies don't have to, historically, they didn't have to meet these in exactly the same way. But the other aspect is, what is the adoption of this? What's going to drive the use of your technology? Again, you could have a great technology, but if there isn't a driver in the community of users, you're going to fail. So if you think about a device which the surgeons really love, and the scope of stakeholder change to realize the business benefit is low. In other words, if one physician decides this is good and I'm going to use it, you win. What if you have to get a whole hospital to adopt this thing? What if you have to get a whole region of 2 million people to adopt this thing before anyone gets it? Think of e-health, large e-health systems. The adoption incentive ranges from low to high. On average, fair to middling. The amount you have to implement before you get the business benefit of the technology, very high. That puts them right about here. Does that explain why we read in the papers about e-health systems failing left, right, and center, and drugs, really good drugs, being very successful? There's an example of one. So you've got to consider both of these things when you're considering technology. And remember I was saying the ecosystem. You've got a healthcare system that's representative of global market needs. Ideally, their needs should inform research, which would then lead to innovation, which would then get funded and create companies, which would lead to commercialization, and these new technologies would then be adopted by the healthcare system. It doesn't work that way. It should work that way, and we're moving toward that, but it doesn't work that way. These guys are not used to articulating their needs. These guys are working on grants and the grant-based system, and they have their own particular scientific bents. They don't necessarily focus on these mundane things. Innovation, you know that we're underfunded, or you may know that we're underfunded in Canada in terms of venture and other sources of capital. And even if you get through the regulatory process, it's really weird. Michael Julius of the Sunnybrook Research Center, he says if his scientists develop great new technology and he walks 20 meters down the hall to his practicing physicians, they don't have a mechanism for buying his new technology. It's just really absurd. How am I doing for time, though? How much? 5 minutes, okay. So there are a lot of pressures on because of the financial environment, because of a number of different pressures on the system that medtech is having to change, having to be more responsive along the lines that I mentioned earlier. There are financial pressures, both angel and others, that have been very difficult over the last 3 years. But one of the things that people say is venture capital going away is a big, big problem. Well, actually, it's not so much of a problem as what we lack in Canada are angels, because in the other parts of the world, the US and Europe, angels are responsible for most of the seed funding. Not VCs, but angels are responsible for it. So we're taking steps now in Ontario and Canada to in fact engage angels much more in the medtech sector. But that's something that you're going to find as you look out. It's angels that are going to be funding. And the early funding is mostly involved in clinical trials, regulatory approval, reimbursement studies, and student outcome trials, as opposed to just the engineering of the technology. The engineering of the technology is not the be-all and end-all. I'm not going to go through this too much, but where we play in the gap, the valley of death, so-called, between research funding and Series A and other funding. We tend to play in there. We funded a number of really interesting companies, 3 of which are here tonight. If you're interested in what we do, by all means contact us. And you'll also see that there's a history, from medical research leading to business-oriented companies, business-oriented researchers, I beg your pardon, which leads to spin-off of a number of different companies, and you can see the ones that we have invested in here. And we're trying to build more and support more and more of these kinds of research to, bench-to-bedside kind of relationships. Again, not going to go into much detail on this, but over the last couple of years, it's been a much better environment for funding. And there have been a number of companies that you can see on these slides. Are these slides going to be made available to the participants? That you can follow up and see their particular stories. And it's been a very positive environment. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but very quickly, for those of you who are interested or have technologies, there are a number of assets in Ontario that are helping small companies, whether it's in medical imaging, whether it's in neuroscience, whether it's getting products, disruptive products faster into the market, or in digital pathology. These are things that we are really being world-class in our approach to market. We've invested in a project with GE. You can look these up on the net. There's a program specifically for medical imaging technology that can provide you support as a small company. The Ontario Brain Institute is really going to be a force to reckon with. I was just in Israel on a Canada-Israel collaboration deal on neuroscience. So we've basically taken all of the neuroscience resources in Ontario and put them under one virtual roof to look at commercialization technologies. Very fascinating. And something called Excite, which takes this outcomes-based research and moves it pre-market, a unique program in Ontario that converts a really painful process, as we call transforming this healthcare technology assessment process from a punitive gate to reimbursement to a product optimization tool. And this is also something that's unique in the world and done in Ontario. And I'm not going to go through these details, but I'd be very happy to talk to you about Excite, but it's really for someone who's really got a good idea of what product that they're developing. So let's talk a little bit about some trends. The markets, there are unsustainable cost curves in healthcare systems globally. So this is driving the need for both technology and business model innovation. The center of gravity of innovation of medtech is shifting away from its historical US base to the US, Israel, and the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China. We're moving from high-cost Cadillac technologies to simplified technologies meeting broad market needs. And the concept of reverse disruption, instead of being a gold-plated technology for Western markets, think of taking a 128-slice CT and making a 1-slice CT and selling that in India, making it cheap, making it very effective, and then being able to bring that back and disrupt the market in North America. Within medtech, a lot of focus on molecular diagnostics being the cleanest, highest impact approach, shrinking, simplifying, interconnecting with IT, mobilizing, and using commodity platforms. These are all having a big impact on what used to be very proprietary, very customized platforms. Moving from the mainframe, the big academic hospital, to home and office applications. And you can read down at the bottom the IT-enabled everything, and you can read those other elements there. So there is a huge opportunity in medtech now as business models are changing, as we're running up against the wall of funding. It's forcing business model changes. It's forcing patients and consumers to get involved in medtech. And one of the things, I did not know this, so I did this little bit of research for this event. Mobile health apps represent medical mobile health apps represent 2% of the total, but account for 3 to 4% of the total sales. And mobile apps in healthcare have the highest average price of all apps in the sector. So look at that. I did not know that there's $1.2 billion in mobile apps in healthcare estimated for this year. That's astounding. And if you look at where those apps are, you know, those are sort of the ones that are selling now. There's almost none down here. This is the area where there's going to be significant expansion, but that's also going to be a highly regulated area where this is not a regulated area. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, and as I say, there's some differences between, you know, typical apps versus healthcare apps and so on, but there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in the field, and it's an area that you must go in with your eyes open. You must go in with very experienced colleagues and clinical folks. This is not something that's easily done by just saying, hey, I have a cool idea that's done in retail or manufacturing, I'm just going to come in and apply it. I saw a story today where there's a bunch of people on the Globe and Mail today that says a bunch of programmers and a bunch of people are going to get together and solve the healthcare crisis you know, by getting together and writing some software. It doesn't happen that way, but on the other hand, I want to encourage you to look at healthcare as a huge market for opportunity, huge innovation opportunity. And hope you're going to be seeing some very impressive companies tonight, and we happen to have invested in them as well. But I want you to listen very carefully to how they've done what they've done, because I think you'll find it inspiring, but also very instructive for your particular company. And listen very carefully about SR&ED, because every company that I know, including my own companies, the 3 companies that I started, have gotten significant support and stretched their investment dollars through using SR&ED funding. And so that's the end of my presentation. I look forward to talking with you in the breaks and so on, or afterwards about anything related to medtech. Thank you.